Welcome to the One Zen Academy podcast. This is everything health, wellness and fitness all under one roof. My name is Kieron and I've got 15 plus years in sports rehabilitation, fitness and health. I've been heavily involved in research and the practical application of it. I offer a results-based service, which is what I bring to you today. Enjoy. Guys, the podcast you're about to hear is about running performance, injury prevention, and everything in between. My background is sports rehabilitation primarily. And I got into sports rehab purely because I used to get injured an awful lot and wanted to better understand everything. So I don't just come at this from my personal experience. I come at this from a practitioner in sports rehabilitation. So I share, I guess, a collective amount of what I know to be true and what I know works, not just on the practicality, but on the literature of everything as well. I do make reference to certain studies, which I'll mention now. Richards et al. 2009, British Journal of Sports Medicine, produced a paper called "Is Your Prescription of Distance Running Shoes Evidence-Based?" And they showed that motion control and cushioned heels in shoes, when compared against injury rates in runners, found that there was no original evidence to suggest that these types of shoes prevent injury in distance runners. And this is worth considering because this was a big kind of literature study. And for instance, Thompson et al. 2004 Journal of Biomechanics showed that using a force capture plate, which is like 3D data capture on runners, funnily enough, where their foot hits the ground, concluded that footwear didn't have any effect on running. And all the reasons that barefoot runners experience less impact forces is probably due to a decrease in stride length overall. And within this solo cast, I talk about why actually we may decrease our stride pattern in terms of our predictive nature of our nervous system. So stay tuned for that. And there's it goes on really. There's a study from the Journal of Medicine and Science in Sport and Exercise, and they showed that runners who exhibit relatively large impact forces whilst running increase their chances of developing an overuse injury. So in the solo cast, I make reference to why that may be based on someone's running trainers. So it's just worth considering. It's food for thought, really, with regards to our ability to run and our over-reliance on trainers. So I just want to make you clear that it's not just me being wishy-washy. There is quite a bit of evidence on running performance and what we actually believe or what the bias is within the industry. So bear that in mind as you move forward, because there is such a thing as cognitive dissonance, where even if I presented all the information to you, you may have a certain belief about running, and this may go against that belief, which is fine. I can take that, but please go into it with an open mind. Like I said, this is based on not just my personal experience, but also the experience of my patients and what the literature actually tells us as well. So without further ado, hopefully you will enjoy it. Please give any feedback on the podcast. So this will be available on iTunes. Please give us a 5-star rating, even if you disagree with it. Give us a 5-star rating with comments. Discussion is always good, and we're available on podbean.com. Again, please leave comments and give us a decent rating. Thank you for your time. I had a PT studio, and the PT studio is called Health Pro. So shout out to Chris Totman, a good friend of mine who hopefully will be on future podcasts, and we'll talk about the life in the PT studio. But we did a 10K. It was the London 10K. We had about 6 weeks training, and I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure about this. You know, I was a big lad, but we did it anyway. I remember doing it in about 52 minutes on 6 weeks training from someone who didn't run, and I went through the finish line. I thought, wow, this is pretty awesome. And very much you get hit by the running bug, so to speak, and it is quite addictive. So I started running a lot more, and I started thinking, well, I can do a 10K, why not a marathon, eh? So I entered the London Marathon, and I trained for the London Marathon, kept getting injured, didn't know what was going on, and I paid a lot of money. I think at the time it was about 180 quid to see this specialist physio who did an assessment. It was like a 2-hour assessment. It was running assessment. It was all sorts of, you know, things that we did. And the reality is, my issues weren't addressed, which I didn't know at the time, and I just kept getting even more injured afterwards. So the specialist physio didn't see what was the obvious thing. And it was only because I kept getting injured, that's when that really spurred me on to doing my degree in sports rehabilitation. And it was only in my 3rd year, when we're really looking at analysis, biomechanics, and so on, that actually I could see something glaringly obvious in the assessment process that had been completed on me, you know, years previous, that I was significantly overstriding. My posture wasn't the best when I was running. When I fatigued, my stride rate changed. One foot was a heel toe, one foot would hit the ground as a 4-foot runner, and this caused all sorts of shear forces throughout the joints in my body. Now, for the love of me, I can't understand why this specialist physio, and bear in mind he was a specialist physio, couldn't see what was glaringly obvious. So I kind of made it a bit of a mission to understand running, understand the biomechanics of running, understand, you know, how everything basically works, how we move, how we groove, and you know, all the rest of it. So what I started to find out when you go through all the literature, all the research that's done on all aspects of running, whether it's performance and injury prevention, you realize actually that a lot of people who are like me, who are on a slightly bigger side. I don't mean fat. I mean, I like to lift weights. So, you know, I sit around at the moment, 86, 87 kilos. That's not distance runner material by any stretch. I promise you it's not. But a lot of people like me start to rely on shoes. Okay, so if you say, for instance, you got an entry into the London Marathon, you get notified in October, but you don't start training until January for whatever reason. It's, you know, mentality of certain people. That's fine. But they go into a running shop and they buy a pair of trainers, and they normally give you, you know, a couple of different pairs. They give you like a mid-range pair and an expensive pair, and they do some sort of analysis. Okay, you know, on the treadmill, and they look at how your foot is, I guess. It's a very kind of crude way of doing it, but that's what happens. And they offer you a pair of trainers based on the shape of your foot and kind of how you hit the ground, and they'll say things like motion control and overpronation and underpronation and so on. But what we know is every year, shoes or running trainers or sneakers, if you're listening in the States, become more advanced. Like the cushioning becomes, you know, more advanced, and they use big long words and so on. But the actual rate of running injuries is still relatively the same, actually increases year on year. So we're in a bit of a weird situation where more money is being spent on trainers, and you can pay 120, 130, 140 pounds on a pair of trainers, but it isn't going to get around the fact that running itself is a skill, and all skills need to be learnt. And this is the issue. And for the life of me, I can't understand why we constantly go around in this circle. If you go on a Saturday morning park run, and for those of you who don't know, a park run is a free timed run, okay, that you just turn up to. It's normally at 9 a.m. There will definitely be one local to you. Okay, a good bunch of people come out, and when you're doing the park run, you'll hear those people who rely on shoes, or you'll hear the heavier set people, and because there'll be a big thud on the ground, you'll hear it. And the issue is, the more sound you make, the more collision there is between the joints, the more vibration there is, and the more chance of injury. It's basically wasted energy, and I will go into that shortly. But when we think, there's a real movement in, I guess, thinking and testing that more cushioning you have, okay, means you have less feedback. So it's a bit of an oxymoron, or that's what it feels like anyway, where you think, I get more cushioning, so it's going to reduce impact on my joints. But what we know from quite a bit of the literature is the opposite is true. The more cushioning you have, the less feedback you put into the system. So your body doesn't know what to do. So, and this is a real issue amongst runners. So if I have more cushioning, okay, I put force into the ground, okay, I get energy back, and we call this ground reaction force. Now imagine your foot, okay, so picture your foot, 33 joints, 26 bones in our feet. They have all these little nerve receptors that are designed by nature to read the ground. Okay, that's what they do, they read the ground. They adjust our position and let the other joints and muscles know how to react. So if they don't know how to react, okay, they don't know how to react due to the superior cushioning of your trainer, then every joint and muscle will miss time, it won't be able to adjust, and running becomes less efficient. There is a high likelihood of injury. There was a fantastic paper on the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and it looked at running trainer prescription, and found that it was a literature review, and found that actually there was no reason to do that. When we look at motion control and all these fancy trainers, it actually didn't make the slightest bit of difference in terms of injury prevention. Okay, so we know with all the literature that's out there, we know it doesn't make a difference at all. So we can spend all that money, but for what really? We know that a heel-toe running technique, that's where your heel hits first, your foot rolls and you toe off. We know that this can increase stress on the knees, because it's as your heel hits the ground, it's like putting a brake on. That stress goes to your knee, you roll off, and you carry on running. But also, because I'm not just all about one type of running, but also an inefficient forefoot strike will probably lead to an Achilles issue. So an inefficient forefoot strike, or too much of a steep angle, i.e. people tend to run on their toes, especially with distance running, will cause a lot of torque, a lot of energy that goes through the Achilles. So instead of the knee this time, you're just going to rupture your Achilles. So it still comes down to efficiency of running, and running is a skill. Okay, so bear with me. So forefoot strike without noise. Imagine running on hot coals, or imagine you're a ninja. Okay, I like to think, I'm a ninja. When you're running, you should be making minimal noise. You should be landing on your forefoot. I didn't say toes, forefoot. So picture a plane coming into land. at the airport. So it's coming into the runway, it's coming into land. Now, in order for a plane to land smoothly, it will have to shorten or decrease the angle as much as possible. If the angle's too steep, we call that a crash. If there's no angle at all, then we call that a crash. Okay, there is an optimal kind of landing path. And this is exactly the same with the foot. We want our foot almost to come in to a landing on the floor. So to an onlooker, if they were looking, it would look like the foot lands flat. Actually, there's probably a millisecond between the big toe and the rest of the foot. Okay, but what you'll find is there's minimal sound. The foot's able to read the ground, tell the knee to bend, tell the hip to soften the impact, and so on and so on. It creates a chain reaction. The big toe, as it lands, will initiate this chain reaction of supported pronation. And this causes your talus, your heel, to fall inward. Your tibia, which is your shin bone, will rotate medially. So it will rotate inwards, which causes your femur, the top portion of your leg above your knee, to rotate medially, i.e. it rotates inwards, which causes your glutes to switch on. So due to the position of your glutes, i.e. your buttocks, okay, if all of those collapse inwards, your buttocks will switch on and pull everything back. Now, if that big toe isn't landing efficiently, then your buttocks will not know what to do. Okay, and you'll see this in some runners, like especially the big heel toe runners. They'll have these fantastic hamstrings, but their buttocks will be nowhere to be seen, and they'll often complain of things like piriformis syndrome or runner's knee, because their buttocks aren't doing the job they're supposed to. Okay, so there are links between certain typical running injuries and lack of proper gait. Gait is just a fancy term for running pattern or walking pattern. So it's worth considering that, or at least spending some time on the skill of running. So imagine, put it this way, imagine if the angle is too steep and you're running high on your toes like a sprinter. That's great for short distance running, fantastic, really explosive, a lot of torque, a lot of energy goes through those joints. But you're only going to run maybe 1, 2, maybe 400 meters. Brilliant. If it's too steep over a distance, then you're definitely just going to lead to an injury. So remember ground reaction force, that drastically increases. So what energy I put into the ground, I get back. And this also determines the surface I run on. So if I'm running on concrete, okay, I'll get more energy back. Okay, and that pretty much is why people often say, oh, if you're doing the long training, you should go on something soft like grass. If you're, I guess, a bigger person, definitely it will soften the blow, so to speak. Force, the actual energy, causes vibration to happen, and it's then the ability of the soft and hard tissue, so soft tissue being muscle, hard tissue being bone, so the soft and hard tissue to deal with that vibration. If the muscle can't, it will look like a tendinopathy or some sort of tear somewhere. Okay, if it's bone, it may kind of look like a stress fracture. So either way, it's the constant vibration that we can't handle that will kind of tear things apart. Are you with me so far? I hope so. If you're running heel toe, you may kind of rely on trainers a bit more with a cushioned heel. There's nothing wrong with that, but you still have to remember the skill of running. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with heel toe, providing you're not overstriding and you're not fudding the ground constantly. Because again, your knees will feel that, and you may start reporting things like pain in the front of your knee, and we call that a patellar tendonitis initially, or a subpatellar bursitis, or other fancy names like that. And that's how it may kind of manifest. Or you'll start talking about piriformis syndrome, which is like the pain in the bum. Or you might start getting lower back pain. maybe not during your running, but maybe the day after, when you wake up in the morning, you may experience back pain because of that constant braking sensation. And all these things are worth considering, because people may not put them together in terms of, I didn't know that was related to running. So forefoot, no sound. Noise means wasted energy. Ideally, we should be running about 180 beats per minute. If you're not sure what 180 beats sounds like, check this out. I'm going to basically clap my hands. Okay, check this out. Okay, so it's that sort of tempo. It will feel really strange at first. I remember when I first started doing it, it felt really odd, as if I was trying to run to go to the toilet. It's quite a fast, choppy feeling. Remember, I was from someone who was constantly overstriding. I was really long stride pattern. So when my foot lands, it was landing in front of my hips, which it's extremely bad. The 180 beats per minute, your foot should land basically underneath your hips, and your knee should be between your hips and the knee, and it should be this nice little line that happens. Obviously they're bent, but it should be a nice little line. And when you're doing 180 beats per minute, what you will find is it's really soft. There's barely any sounds. Breathing's actually a lot easier as well, because you don't feel the need to really push on as much as you would normally. And I started getting into minimalist running, or like barefoot running, because I kept getting injured. And the more I was reading about the whole subject, I thought, I need to reevaluate what I'm doing. I still love running, but I can't be running with constant pain all the time. So I started working on the little things at first, like posture. Okay, posture. You need to be in a nice line. Okay, your head needs to be over your shoulders. Shoulders need to be over your hips. Hips need to be over your knee, and knee over your ankle. And it sounds like something really simple, but again, if you go to a park run, you'll see a mixture of different postures, and people will have these really rounded shoulders. Their head position will be carried forward. The amount of pressure on their thoracic spine and their C-spine alone will be phenomenal. Okay, if I've got these rounded shoulders and my head position is forward, the ribs will close in on my diaphragm. So my diaphragm, the main breathing muscle, will not be able to do its job very well. What tends to happen from there is, because the diaphragm can't do its job properly, the hip flexors increase in tone or tonicity. And I don't mean they tone up. I mean they get maybe electrically excited. So they have... all these muscles have different receptor sites, and they get innervated or stimulated very easily. And people often complain about tight hip flexors when they're running. It's more of a posture breathing issue. Okay, the hip flexors, if you were to look at a cadaver, which, you know, everyone's got their hobbies, I guess. If you were looking at a cadaver and you looked at the diaphragm, it would look like it blends into the hip flexors. And that's what it does. There's like these little tentacles, and it blends in. So we know that diaphragm will affect the hip flexors. Your hip flexors, one of your hip flexors becomes one of your quadriceps on the front of your leg. And if that becomes overactive, or people perceive it as tight, okay, tight just means your nervous system has wound it up. It's activating these little muscle spindles, okay, in your muscle, but keeps preparing it, keeps it switched on. Then you may then develop knee issues from that, or because of poor posture. Okay, let alone headaches, because the position of your head is too far forward, and you may start to develop a hunch, so to speak, and you start compressing your C-spine. And some people often experience different sensations in their hands, all because there's compression in their C-spine. Okay, they may atrophy at the arms because the nerves are too compressed, so the muscles respond by basically they're not getting any messages, so they start to wither away. And when you start to put it together, you start to think, wow, posture is really important. it's probably the first thing you should work on before running is posture and breathing. They sound really simple, but this is why a lot of runners are starting to turn to things like yoga, because yoga works for that. Yoga works with getting you nice and mindful with regards to your position, your breathing, how everything should function just by standing, let alone running. So it's one of those weird predicaments that we're in. It's only when we start to get injuries or niggles we start to do that. But imagine you start that before you start running. Running becomes a lot more pleasurable. So we also get this relaxation response. So I guess the idea is, if you think about running and you're thinking, well, I'm doing running for charity, but I can't be bothered to go out today. All these things are, it's raining, it's cold, it's, X, Y, Z, fill in the blank. Then you're going to be far from relaxed. You may start thinking it's quite a stressful experience. So if you start thinking running stressful, but you do it anyway, then you may have things like blood sugar fluctuations, because of the amount of cortisol floating around your body. Okay, it's all of these things. How you think will affect your posture. Your posture will affect your breathing, but your breathing will also affect your posture, and your posture will also affect the way you think. It's all more of a circular thing. So focus on your posture, focus on breathing, mindfulness, meditation, these things really work. We know that your head position counts for approximately 80% of the proprioception is in C1, C2. Okay, and that's straight out of the Czech Institute textbooks, really. So we know where your head position basically tells the rest of the body where it should be. So it tells the rest of the limbs where it should be. So if my head position is out, then rest assured the rest of my spine will be out. And the other things that connect into the spine are your hips, your shoulder girdle, i.e. your shoulder blades and so on. So if they're out, well, they're going to tell the other limbs that are connected to it that they're also out. And as soon as you do that and you keep repeating it, it just becomes the norm. Okay, so now you adapt what we call, or most people term as, a faulty posture. So worth considering, because this wastes drastic amounts of energy. I would say with regards to any running, especially if you're retraining running or you're going for the barefoot minimalist running, start small, then work to big. In my bid, because I'm a bit of a A-type personality, in my bid to redo running, I initially started by putting on a pair of, I think, Vibram 5 fingers initially. And I just started running. Why not? Felt great. Felt really good. And it was about mile 3. And my calves had all but given up. They were pure jelly. They were gone. They were shot. And I've got quite big calves as it is. Okay, they're quite meaty, but they were gone. And I had DOMS, so the delayed onset muscle soreness. I had DOMS for 2 weeks, and it's safe to say I overdid it. Okay, safe to say. So you start small. Remember, if you've been wearing trainers all your life, then, or picture this actually. Imagine you put big, thick ski gloves on your hands, okay, and I then got you to write an essay. Okay, you could still write the essay, it just may not look pretty. Okay, so what will happen is you'll cushion and desensitize your hands, and they will weaken and atrophy. The same happens with the feet. So imagine if you've worn trainers all your life, or the past 20 odd years. You can't expect your feet to be strong, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. Okay, so you need to train these muscles, and you need to train the skill. So remember, we've got those 26 bones, 33 joints, 19 different muscles, and 107 ligaments. All of them do not know what they're doing as soon as you take your shoes and socks off. Okay, they do not know what they're doing. As soon as you take your shoes and socks off and go barefoot in your garden, or you walk about in the grass, it feels great. the nerves in your feet suddenly activate and think, wow, what is this? The foot itself is so complex and unique. Okay, it's what makes the foot beautiful, really. We have these little nerves in the bottom of our feet. Okay, these tiny little nerves which are responsible for upright stability. Okay, upright stability. They feed into the system. They feed into the peripheral nervous system. Okay, if we block these, we cause a delay in the response. The greater the time the foot spends with the floor, and then we have greater ground reaction force. So, and again, the greater ground reaction force, the more impact forces we have through our joints. Now, please don't confuse with what I'm saying. That I'm not suggesting you go out, you buy a pair of minimalist shoes such as Vibram Five Fingers or Vivos and so on. If you've been in those supportive footwear for all your life, okay, your feet are as weak as funk. Yes, I said funk, not the other one. You need to build up slowly. Okay, it's like strength and conditioning for your feet. What I did initially, I put either the new version of running at the end of my gym workouts or at the beginning. I used it as a warm-up, but I only started on 30 seconds. So after some great mobility work, to mobilize my foot, mobilize my ankle, mobilize my hip region, I only did 30 seconds to a minute initially, focusing on posture, the breathing, the 180 beats per minute, and I just did that. At the start of every workout, I still do weights. And that was enough to start building up the skill without fatigue being present. Because as soon as you start to fatigue, the skill that you're acquiring goes out the window. Okay, you cannot acquire skill, or at least it's really difficult to acquire skill when you're fatigued. So start on 30 seconds to a minute. Okay, is what I recommend. Make sure you mobilize your foot, your ankle, and you don't have to do anything fancy. Get your hands, mobilize, wiggle the bones around in your foot, massage your foot. You don't have to be a massage therapist to do this on yourself. I would say it took me about 6 to 8 months before I was comfortable enough to run a 5K park run in my, I've got these running sandals by Zero Shoes. XERO, Zero Shoes. I've got these running sandals. It wasn't the run itself that was the issue. It was the fact I never got so much abuse when running than with the people at the park run. It's like me turning up in sandals was... I don't know, it must have been the most offensive thing they've ever seen. Yeah, I've got all sorts of abuse from that. These same people had strapping round their knees, poor posture. You could hear their thuds a mile away. But they had these beautiful cushioned shoes. And then they had the audacity to look at me and say, "Oh, you're doing it wrong." It was a case of, we need to talk. But obviously, they don't want to talk because, we have this thing called cognitive dissonance. Even when you present all the evidence and it goes against their belief system, they will say, no, thank you. And that's okay. They're not ready for it. So remember, running is a skill. Take your time to learn it and enjoy it. Dr. Emily Splinkle, I think I'm pronouncing her surname right, produced a book, a beautiful book called Barefoot Strong. She's a sports podiatrist in New York. And she I think she summarized it quite well, and I'm paraphrasing, by the way, but the peripheral nerves in the foot process texture, vibration, skin stretch, deep pressure, and light touch. So things such as uneven terrain and impact forces can be better judged. And what she was getting at is your nervous system learns. So if I go over a variety of terrains, either barefoot in my minimalist trainers and so on, then my body, my nervous system will be better able to accept and judge in future what should happen in that situation. So the more I do it, basically, the better equipped I get, the more energy efficient I become. If I continue wearing the trainers, I'm constantly in no man's land. My nerves cannot work, they can't learn, and they can't judge. So then I'm just relying solely on my trainers, my orthotics, and so on and so on. It becomes a crutch. And I'm not saying that for certain individuals this isn't what they should do. You may have serious foot issues where this is a need. But there is an over-reliance and an over-prescription of orthotics in the mainstream public domain. Purely because there's a lot of money to be made based on what I consider misrepresentation and misinformation. When I look at my 4-year-old running, okay, bear in mind he's had no training at all, and you look at any 4-year-old actually move, but obviously I only look at my 4-year-old because he's mine, but he runs, and I've timed him at exactly 180 beats per minute. I haven't ever said any of this to him or given him any sort of formal training. He's 4, but he runs beautifully barefoot. 4-foot runner, 180 beats per minute. Beautiful posture, and he can keep going. Okay, he can keep going. It looks beautiful. At the end of that, he's tired. He instinctively drinks water. He has something to eat. When he plays, he gets into a beautiful deep squat position. He has the right amount of mobility and stability at every joint, his ankle, his knee, his hip, and he's able to remain there. Everyone, if you're born able-bodied, was able to get there in these positions once upon a time. You were able to run beautifully once upon a time. The human body is designed by and molded by nature for locomotion and movement. It's only through our lifestyles and how we live that we decrease the ability of our bodies to do this. But what I'm saying is train the nervous system, train the physiology, and it will come. It will definitely come. Like I said, I'm not a naturally gifted runner, okay, distance runner, but I can do it. And through minimal amount of training, through breathing exercise, through posture control, through yoga, I can do it. So it's worth considering. It's worth investing the time in the skill, not in the pair of trainers. Okay, so build it up slowly. Start small. Listen to your body. If there's certain aches and pains that shouldn't be there, then address them, or at least find someone who can help you address them. But don't leave it. So imagine you're doing all this running, which is great. You generally feel good, okay, but you're thinking where to next, or how do I increase recovery, how do I increase performance? Well, I'm going to take you off just a couple of different tangents actually. Excuse me. What I consider a general mistake from most runners, and don't get me wrong, I'm not being all high and mighty or completely judgmental. It is what it is, but there's a general mistake, and it's a lack of strength and conditioning amongst distance runners. So most running clubs, most running groups, most runners, you know, they'll look a certain way. They can keep going and going and going, but they generally carry and please try not to be too offended by this. These are just my observations. They generally carry a lot of body fat, and posture can be somewhat an issue. And you always hear, if you're in the changing rooms or the locker rooms of certain gyms, and you hear, you see a running group come in and they'll talk afterwards, they'll generally complain about aches and pains, joint issues, and so on. You'll often hear, because of some of the groups that I see, oh, you shouldn't run because it will hurt your knees. And it's both true and false. It's true in the sense you've done something wrong. It's false in the sense of it doesn't have to happen at all. A lot of running groups should invest some time in weight training And I don't mean circuit training. I think the default is circuit training because it's familiar for us. But circuit training is just, cardiovascular training with weights. Well, that's great, but you're not really, it's hard to learn the skill of the movement under such fatigue. So I'm talking things like weighted squats, like sets of weighted squats, working up to like 5-6 repetitions, some decent heavy stuff. I'm talking about deadlifts. Okay, so squats will focus, on the glutes, on the quadriceps, on the hamstrings, depending on how, what your range of motion looks like. The deadlifts will focus on the posterior chain of muscles from the top of the base of your skull, all the way down to your heel. Okay, we're looking at lunges, which then focus not just on the legs, but also the abductors and the adductors, the inner and outer thigh area. Calf raises, weighted calf raises to strengthen the soleus and the gastrocnemius of your lower leg. A push and pull to focus on, strengthen arm swing. Abdominal or core-based exercises that have a lot of rotation within them and a lot of eccentric development within the abdominal region. All of these things need to be input into any program. It's been more than shown through all the literature that a proper periodized strength program has the ability not just to increase performance, but decrease drastically injury rates. But why don't people do it? I think it's because it's quite alien to someone who just focuses on more the aerobic type work. So, but it's worth considering. And if you're not sure, there are hundreds of personal trainers around. There are hundreds of sports therapists around that can show you and take you through this. It's pretty much one of the main reasons for the academy. So we train personal trainers, we train sports therapists, we train people how to become yoga teachers, and we do kind of come at it from a slightly different angle. We look at performance, recovery, and so on, and we put it into the syllabus. So if all else fails, start looking out for the One Zen Academy personal trainers and start investing in yourself with some of these guys. But even if we look at recovery, people just think, why just rest? Well, what is rest really? Okay, what else are you doing? Because sleep is crucial. We know a lot of people don't get the quality of sleep or the duration of sleep. It's essential. Get some sleep, get some quality sleep. If you're not sleeping, you are not recovering, hands down. And if we don't address why we're not sleeping, then what are you going to do really? Are you drinking too much caffeine? Are you having too many stimulants in general? Are you going to bed too late, waking up too early? Do you have inconsistent sleeping patterns? Do you sleep next to your mobile phone or next to Wi-Fi? Do you sleep with a TV on? There's a lot of things that go into sleep, and we will have a whole podcast at one point devoted to sleep and recovery from life in general. That might be worth listening out for. We've got things like cryotherapy, cold showers in the morning. Cold showers in the morning have been shown to improve recovery but boost your immune system. It's not the most pleasant, but it's well worth doing. And trust me, I hate the cold, but I embrace a cold shower on a regular basis. We have things like saunas. I love saunas. Okay, 20 minutes in a sauna 4 times a week has been shown to improve recovery, but also decrease things like depression, anxiety, panic disorders, like drastically. And that's been shown in a recent Finnish study. So, those two on their own, well worth doing. You can do both, and we call that contrast bathing. So you would get into a sauna, go in there for 20 minutes, have a cold shower for 2 minutes, get back in the sauna for another 20 minutes, then have a cold shower. And going from that hot to cold. So imagine the sauna opens up everything, opens up the pores, dilates your blood vessels. The shower constricts everything. You then get back in the sauna, it opens everything up. And this creates like a pumping effect that really gets out the nitty gritty, the rubbish stuff from your body. We've got things like mobility work versus flexibility. And a lot of people get them confused, but mobility is really the joint position, is the ability for the joint to get through different positions. Flexibility is just really how far you can stretch a muscle. So I would argue that mobility and relaxation are probably better for you than flexibility. Flexibility is really controlled by the nervous system. Okay, so it's your nervous system that really winds up muscles or relaxes them. If you focus on a bit of mobility and breathing, the flexibility will come. It's also worth considering that the stronger a muscle is, the more flexible you will be. So tightness is always secondary to a weakness or a perceived weakness. So if my nervous system perceives my core is weak, so picture your core like your torso. If your nervous system perceives that as weak, then your hamstrings will generally tighten up, because your hamstrings go from your hip to your knee. So your body will then think, okay, let's lock the hip against the knee. So it will lock that down. And that's generally why hamstrings just tighten up. It's very rarely because you're sitting down for a long time. That's more of a hydration in the fascia type issue. But it's worth considering that your nervous system winds up the muscle, and that leads to a decrease in flexibility. Mobility is an easy win. You can look at mobility exercises from the Gray Institute. They're quite useful. Our YouTube channel has some decent mobility movements for the ankle, the hip, and the shoulder. Our YouTube channel is just One Zen Academy. Type it into the search and you'll see my beautiful face. My beautiful face pops up, or my massive nose and ears, that is. Things like using compression garments. I know they're a bit kind of wishy-washy. I quite like compression garments, not for use during the running or the movement, but for afterwards. I think they're quite useful. So they will locally increase blood pressure, which increases circulation. And I've personally got a lot out of them. Whether it's a placebo effect or not, I really don't know, but I honestly don't care because it works for me. So I quite like that. Obviously, I'm a fan of massage, being a sports rehabilitator, getting someone hands-on, deep into the muscle and the fascia, into the belly of stuff, and basically getting things moving and grooving. A big fan. It does work. I know a lot of people, if they don't go for massage, they turn to foam rolling, and you'll see a mixture of and variation of foam rolling. Some good, some really pointless, like when people foam roll the IT bands down the side of the leg. It's one of the most excruciating pains you ever experience, and ultimately pointless. If you know what the IT band is and what it does, you'll realize it can't be stretched, and you shouldn't be prodding it around that way. If you want to make an impact on the IT band, then you need to focus on the glute max and the TFL, which is on the front side of your hip, and also determine why your IT band, or you think your IT band, is tightening in the first place. It's more of a lateral displacement when you're running, which normally means your foot isn't controlling the motion as much as it should. I.e. it's collapsing too far in, and it might be more of a weakness in your glute type issue. But either way, it's not the IT band's fault, it's something else. So investigate, I guess. And one of the final things I'll briefly mention is, and this really is fringe, a bit wishy-washy, but there is a mountain of evidence starting to emerge. I'm a big fan of this, and it's grounding, or some people call it earthing. I know it sounds a bit hippie-ish. It's really going barefoot on grass or stone. And it's the idea that the earth has a certain magnetic field, and that it will affect our energy and increase recovery. Now, I am aware of certain professional sports teams that actually do this, and they report huge benefits. So it sounds wishy-washy, but there's a lot of big sports teams that are doing this. There's a growing amount of doctors and sports scientists that are actually starting to adopt this as well. So I think it's a case of watch this space. To be fair, it doesn't cost anything. It feels nice as well, having some grass in your feet and just standing there, breathing in. It might be more of a relaxation response, but the reality is it feels great. Okay, that's ultimately the point. And if it feels great and you're creating a relaxation response, you are definitely increasing recovery. So really, what does it matter? But I'm a big fan of it. You can buy earthing mats. So you can buy these special mats that you can ground, or you can plug in and it will automatically ground you. They're quite useful. I've used them before. They're fantastic, to be fair. I feel a difference straight away. You can buy yoga versions of that as well, which I haven't tried myself, but I'm probably going to invest in the future. So my hope for you is that you have an idea about running and recovery. So remember the key points. Running is a skill, so take your time and learn to enjoy the skill. Focus on posture and breathing. Focus on mobility of the joints. Take your time and run at 180 beats per minute. Posture, breathing, 180 beats per minute. Relax. Start off slow. Build up gradually. Do not over rely on trainers. They will not save you from your lack of skill. And all in all, when it comes to recovery, make sure you get quality sleep. Like I said, focus a bit on mobility, flexibility. An easy way around this is taking up yoga. Do some weight training, some strength training. Focus on squats, deadlifts, lunges, a push and pull movement, and a lot of core work twice a week. You can use compression socks, compression tights to help you. You can use massage. Find a decent sports massage therapist and book them in once a month. You can purchase foam rollers quite cheaply these days. Learn about some foam rolling and do some grounding, some earthing. Experiment with some cryotherapy, maybe jump in a sauna, and just find what works for you. But bear in mind, there is an awful lot of stuff out there. For more information, if you go to our website, onezenacademy, all one word, .com. I would love for everyone to be a trainer or sports therapist, but you can go to the blog on our site, and there's some useful information on there on training, nutrition, and everything in between. So hopefully that was of some use to you. I haven't bored you to tears. Next time on our podcast, like I said before, this is a solo cast, but we will have guests. I have got guests lined up. So I hope you hear from me soon. My name's been Kieron. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you for joining me for the One Zen Academy podcast. I hope you found this beneficial. For more information, go to www.onezenacademy.com. That's onezenacademy, all one word, .com. My name's been Kieron. I hope to see you next time. Thank you.